Good morning, everyone. We appreciate you staying for this next plenary session, the 2025 Fulcrum, Everything Balances on the Middle East. This session speaks directly to our conference theme, The World on Balance, by examining one of the most pivotal regions shaping global security, diplomacy, and economic stability. As shifting alliances, new regional dynamics, and global power recalibrations converge, understanding the Middle East's role as a strategic fulcrum is more important than ever. When this session concludes, we invite you to step out into the hallway to meet our esteemed panelists and for our book sale featuring work by Alex Vantana. Leading today's discussion is our moderator, Mona Yacoubian, an esteemed colleague on the WACA board and a widely respected expert, Middle East policy and conflict analysis expert, and she is also the director and senior advisor at CSIS. So please join me in welcoming Mona and our distinguished panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nasim, and good morning, everyone. Let me very quickly, you all have bio information, but I want to very quickly introduce our esteemed panel. I'll introduce them in the order in which I'm going to be speaking with them. So first, to my immediate left is Dan Shapiro. Dan served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense at the Pentagon in 2024 to 2025 and served as U.S. Ambassador to Israel from 2011 to 2017. We also are honored to have Alex Vatanka, who is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. He specializes on Iran. And last but certainly not least, Alina Romanowski, who most recently served as U.S. Ambassador to Iraq from 2022 to 2024, and before that, U.S. Ambassador to Kuwait. Welcome to all of you. So let me just frame a little further this panel, because we are talking a lot about this idea of the Middle East as a fulcrum. And I want to sort of expand out that analogy and talk a little bit about this fulcrum also being at a moment, at what I call a hinge moment. So the fulcrum is on a fulcrum. It is at a pivot. I think we're witnessing a historic moment in the Middle East, where we are seeing the vanishing of an old order and a new order emerging, but arguably the contours of this new Middle East have yet to be fully shaped. And I think the two catalytic conflicts ongoing in the region now, in Gaza and with Iran, how those conflicts evolve will say a lot about the future trajectory of the Middle East, and given the Middle East as this fulcrum for the global order is going to have, I think, enormous implications that go well beyond the Middle East. So with that, let's start with Gaza, which is in a lot of ways a defining conflict in the region. Dan, I know you follow it very closely. We know that just Monday, the UN Security Council passed a resolution that essentially enshrines the 20-point Trump ceasefire plan, which is not only about a ceasefire, but even these so-called day-after arrangements dealing with security and governance. You engaged a lot, I think, in your just previous position at the Pentagon on many of these questions. What is your sense about the durability of the ceasefire plan and what remains to be done?
Sure. Thank you, Mona. It's great to be with you and dear colleagues, and appreciate the role that the World Affairs Councils play in our national conversation on these issues. Let me just first say, Mona, that I want to endorse your framing of this hinge moment in the Middle East. And this was even true before October 7th, 2023, when we were really on the cusp, and I was serving in the Biden administration at the time, of some major steps our friends, moderate Arab states, and Israel, which is Iran and its axis of resistance, the terrorist proxy organizations that it supports, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, and of course the Assad regime in Syria have all taken major hits, or even in the case of Assad, even disappeared. And so there is opportunity here to try to get back on the road to this more integrated and peaceful coalition of our friends and our partners who actually work together to defend themselves, defend Israel from Iran and from some of these other attacks during these last 2 years. But so much of whether we can actually capitalize on that opportunity rests on whether this Gaza peace plan can actually take hold. I was fairly critical of the Trump administration's approach to Gaza for the first 9 months, where they seemed to give a free hand to continuing operations, and President Trump had kind of a strange proposal of a Gaza Riviera that would be built and kick out Palestinians to build hotels. That was never serious, but it did embolden very extreme elements in the Israeli political system who wanted to do something else, which was occupy and expel and resettle in Gaza. That's all off the table. What changed was on September 9th, when Israel took an attempted strike at Hamas leaders in Doha, in Qatar, unsuccessfully, but it was an inflection point that President Trump very effectively seized to push the Israelis to agree to the ceasefire, to push the Qataris and the Turks to get Hamas to agree to release all the hostages, who are thankfully home, except for 3 deceased hostages. And that opened the possibility for this 20-point plan. Now, the 20-point plan, the first 4 or 5 points were the ceasefire and the hostage release, and that's been done. But the next phase is very, very challenging. It's true that the UN Security Council resolution endorsed it on Monday, and that's another successful win. But there are several elements of it. One of them is disarming Hamas, which still holds control of about 47% of Gaza, and you can see them with their guns on the streets enforcing their rule, oppressing Palestinians, and still posing some kind of threat, not as much as it was previously, but some kind of threat to Israel. And while Israel holds about 53% of Gaza. Then you have the plan to reconstruct Gaza. $70 billion, the World Bank estimates, that probably Saudi Arabia, the UAE, other Gulf states would be called upon to fund. You have the creation of a board of peace that President Trump will chair, and then underneath that, appointing Palestinian technocratic leadership more moderate than Hamas, and maybe not, or maybe yes or no connected to the Palestinian Authority, which is in need of reform. And that's all supposed to happen. And then eventually, dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians toward what President Trump has called a credible pathway to a Palestinian state. So those are all the elements, but the key that unlocks all that progress is disarmament of Hamas. If you don't get the guns out of Hamas's hands, if you don't get Hamas out of those tunnels and maybe out of Gaza, the plan also calls for safe passage into exile for fighters and leaders who remain in Gaza. You really can't get this international stabilization force of Arab and Muslim states to come in. None of those countries, and I know this from our dialogues with them when I was at the Pentagon, none of them want to come in to fight Hamas and take away their guns. They want to come in after Hamas has been removed from power. That's the only way they will feel safe to do so. None of the funding will show up for reconstruction because what it looks like right now is Hamas is battered and bruised, but clinging to power and potentially building back for another round of conflict, just like all the previous 4 or 5 rounds of conflict over the last decade and a half. And the Saudis and the Emiratis don't want to throw good money after bad, build towers that will then be destroyed in the next war. So that money is not going to show up. And the moderate Palestinian leadership won't be able to take hold if Hamas is still in power. So disarmament is the key, very difficult.
They distinguish between this current Israeli government and the ability to work with Israel in general. And so that, to me, raises a bigger question about the state of Israeli domestic politics. And, you know, I know you're deeply familiar, having served as ambassador there. Could you kind of give us a sense of, number one, when can we expect elections? Number two, what are the prospects for Prime Minister Netanyahu in terms of being reelected? You yourself noted this sort of current tenor of the Israeli government. It is very right-leaning. We haven't talked about the West Bank, but we're watching, I think they are watching with growing alarm, settler violence in the West Bank, which appears to be spiraling out of control, some of it fomented by some elements in the current Israeli government. So what is your sense of kind of the sort of the direction of travel for Israeli domestic politics?
So this is the most right-wing government Israel's ever had. It includes not just Netanyahu and his Likud party and some ultra-Orthodox parties, but two really extremist parties, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, two ministers in the government who come from the farthest right-wing, pro-settlement, but really, in some cases, openly racist and supremacist kind of authoritarian instincts, and they hold key cabinet positions. They aren't the final policymakers on everything, but they've influenced, and they were the only partners Netanyahu could form a government with because he's on trial for corruption, and most of the rest of the political spectrum would not endorse his prime ministership. So that has been an obstacle. Even before October 7th, when the Saudis were talking about normalizing with Israel, they said, well, we want to hear that there will be a pathway to a Palestinian state. And this government, composed of that faction, which is so opposed to a Palestinian state, and we see that in the extremists emboldened in the West Bank who are carrying out this violence, was never going to be able to say that. So probably that was an obstacle. Well, we are nearing an Israeli election. 2026 will be an election year in Israel. In the Israeli parliamentary system, the latest it can be is October of 2026, but there are various means and reasons why it may be earlier due to parliamentary maneuvers, budget deadlines, and so forth. So sometime in the spring or summer or early fall of 2026, we will see it. Prime Minister Netanyahu goes into that election with a lot of burdens. He, of course, was the prime minister on October 7th and has not taken full responsibility for that, but many Israelis hold him accountable for the failures before and on October 7th. He's still on trial for corruption. That's not going to change. This trial has been going on for 6 years, and it's nowhere near its end. He even having gotten the hostages out, which is, of course, a big win, and Israelis are very happy about it. Hamas, as we mentioned, is still there, still left behind. And what he said on October 7th, and every Israeli leader has said, is it's unacceptable that Hamas continue to rule Gaza because it just means we're going to go back to war sooner or later anyway, and that we can't allow after those attacks of October 7th. So he goes in with those burdens. On the other hand, he goes in with assets. He initiated the strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities, which then the United States helped finalize with our strikes on their underground facilities. Very popular in Israel. Of course, the hostages did come home. The Assad regime has fallen. Hezbollah has taken big hits. So he has an argument that he is the prime minister who knows how to handle these different threats and different pressures and achieve things. And so his popularity went way down after October 7th. It's rebounded partially, but not enough at this point for him to win enough seats for a coalition. Well, his two main arguments to the Israeli public, I believe, will be, number one, I am Donald Trump's best friend. Donald Trump has stratospheric popularity in Israel, especially after the hostages came home, and we saw his visit on that day. And to the maximum extent Netanyahu can wrap himself in will probably win Netanyahu a little bit of support, maybe not enough, but he'll use that. But the second thing he'll make, and this becomes a further obstacle to some of the other goals that the Trump administration has, is he will say to the Israeli public, who do you trust to prevent the creation of a Palestinian state? Me, who's opposed that my whole career, and that's been a defining position for him, or these newbies and lesser lights and less experienced politicians who don't know how to deal with all the pressures they'll be under. Palestinian state, which I think probably everyone on this stage and many in this room would say, and even President Trump is saying, needs to be part of the conversation. And it's how you get the Arabs to come to the table with funds for reconstruction. It's how you get them to come with troops for the International Stabilization Force. If they have a sense it's leading somewhere, even if it takes a long time, it's going to take a long time. We're not on the cusp of a Palestinian state this year, next year, and probably the next 5 years. But if it's the direction of travel, you have that. But if every day Israeli politicians, Netanyahu himself, and probably his opponents, who don't want to be outflanked by him on this because it's very unpopular in Israel, so close to October 7th, the notion that a similar attack could occur from the West Bank in a failed Palestinian state or a Palestinian state that fell under Hamas's rule. That's the overriding sentiment in Israel. So that's going to be the discourse in Israel during this election year. I would say Netanyahu's chances of remaining prime minister are in the 50-50 range, maybe not with the current coalition. It's possible that he can bring some of the more moderate people to sit with him that refuse.
Another place we have a lot to look out for is Iran, Alex. And as we think about this Middle East at a hinge moment and the evolving order in the region, the role of Iran, of course, is key. We've seen a number of unprecedented developments over the past couple of years, including this first instance of interstate direct conflict between Israel and Iran. Most dramatically this past June in the 12-day war. The U.S., of course, eventually joined that effort. There are rumblings that tensions are rising again. I would note that the IRGC seized a tanker in the Gulf of Hormuz or Strait of Hormuz maybe last week. Maybe they've released it now. But it clearly suggests that tensions potentially are once again rising. What is your sense of the prospect for renewed conflict between Israel and Iran and potentially the U.S. joining in again as well?
Great. Mona, first, thank you very much. Great to be with my fellow panelists, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me. Look, I think fundamentally, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, he really does want to have some kind of a nuclear deal with the United States. He would agree to something that looks like what the Obama administration signed in 2015, maybe even a lower level of enrichment on the part of Iran, tougher, inspection regime that might, be something that the Trump administration can lift up and show to the American public and say, we got a better deal than the Obama administration. That sort of thing Khamenei is prepared to do. But I think fundamentally Khamenei doesn't trump the Trump administration, doesn't think that's where the story will end. He really fundamentally, and I will tell you a bit of context about him, that's where the historian in me comes in, but he fundamentally thinks this is a slippery slope. That Donald Trump will ask for one thing today, another thing tomorrow, and something else next week, and this slippery slope will not end till there is no Islamic Republic anymore. That is Ali Khamenei's fundamental fear. He's not fearful about giving up some of the nuclear program, whatever is left of it. And that's obviously a big question mark here. How much of a damage did the U.S. and Israel actually do to that Iranian nuclear program back during the 12-day war? But here's the thing we have to appreciate when we're trying to judge a system where such one individual has so much power, as Ali Khamenei does in the Islamic Republic. Here's a man, and if you could just indulge me and put yourselves in the shoes of this 86-year-old man who's been there since June of 1989 as the supreme leader of a system, one of the very few theocracies out there, representing God on earth. Now, we can dismiss some of what I'm saying, but that's the official narrative. He has invested so much in a few things. One of them is the nuclear program in terms of political capital. The other one is that the United States really is not a force for good. It's essentially an imperialist power in the Middle East trying to plunder the region of its resources. That's the Khamenei narrative. This is not Alex Ratakis speaking. Don't hold it against me. This is Ali Khamenei speaking. Obviously, that we all know about the axis of resistance. Israel, by definition, is part of that imperial project. The Iranian narrative is there will be no Israel if there wasn't a United States. So suddenly, 36 years into his supreme leadership, all these key pillars that he's invested so much in are on shaky ground. And he's not just under pressure in terms of the regional dynamics that are changing, not in favor of, in Iran's favor. Trump administration did something that no one American president had done before, actually took kinetic action against the regime. Again, that's a wake-up call. And I'm sure we'll talk about the amazing amount of pressure inside of Iranian society, because this is the thing. If you think there is one tool in million or so Iranians who I would probably wager and say 90% really have had enough. They want to change course. That anger hasn't been weaponized, if I could put it that way, but he knows that he needs to make certain tactical retreats on the nuclear front, for example, in order for him to be able to essentially last, because we shouldn't forget he was in a bunker deep down in a mountain somewhere for a few days back in June. So he knows he could be a target. I mean, Hassan Nasrallah literally died in circumstances that could happen to Ali Khamenei. So there's actually that physical security for him, the man, his family, that I'm sure part of the new calculations. So back to your point, I don't think escalation and war is going to happen tomorrow, Mona. I think if it happens, and I go with what Israeli and American officials have said, if there is intelligence suggesting that, you know what, the damage to those nuclear sites wasn't actually that great, they have recovered a lot, and they're rebuilding, and they're rebuilding fast, maybe with the help of external actors, and therefore we need to go in again. That's the scenario where I can see in the short term a return to a limited conflict. Again, I want to emphasize, I don't think anybody expects a large-scale war. Certainly the Iranians don't think there's going to be American boots on the ground. It's the United States Air Force that most likely, with special operations and intelligence capabilities, that are going to be put at play here. So that's the other side of the equation, that Khamenei says, if I don't get a deal, what's the worst thing that's going to happen to me? Another limited round of conflict and more sanctions, but you know what? We can take it. We took the 12-day war, we survived it, and we've been under sanctions pretty much since the early 1980s. And, by the way, the Chinese have a vested interest in making sure this regime, and the Russians, I should add, survives. I was just looking at the statistics yesterday, Mona. China has now overtaken Saudi Arabia. I'm sorry, Iran has now overtaken Saudi Arabia as the largest supplier of oil to China, right when the United States is telling everybody else don't buy Iranian oil. So there are countries out there that have a vested interest in seeing the United States not succeed in its Iran policy. So let me just stop there by saying that those types of things are also giving hope to Ali Khamenei. Fundamentally, he knows he's on the wrong track. Nobody, I mean, if you, those of you who might be Persian speakers in the room and have some time to invest in this, please watch some Iranian state TV, and you'll be amazed with some of the things I just told you are being expressed in Iran officially in official channels. It's not a secret. Everyone knows the country on a wrong path. The question is, how do you get yourself out of this pickle? And the optics here are important. Khamenei does not want to do what Donald Trump, the president of the United States, likes the most, which is kind of a very clear-cut expression of capitulation, right? Khamenei's not going to do that. No. So if the United States really kind of comes to conclude that we can live with this Iranian regime as long as they don't weaponize, and let's give him a way out of this, Khamenei probably will take that seriously.
So that's another thing to watch, and I would love to draw you out further on it. But, and I would note, it is interesting to have heard in the Oval Office meeting between President Trump and the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, there was this passing reference to a desire to go back to negotiations with Iran and kind of an openness to resuming negotiations as opposed to confrontation. This is certainly something I think the Saudis want. So if there's an artful way, a face-saving way to get there, I think it'll be fascinating to watch. But we have to talk a bit about the situation inside Iran, which you referenced. I mean, Khamenei is 86 years old. I think it's important to hear your thoughts on prospects for succession. What, even if he lives for another 10 years, or what are potential scenarios? But also the pressures that Iran is under economically. I understand Tehran is on the verge of running dry, running out of water, if not already. Enormous internal domestic challenges that an isolated Iran certainly can't address effectively. So give us a better sense of what the domestic situation is like in Iran and what would succession look like?
Thanks. Well, if I could very quickly just react to what you said about regional states, you referenced MBS. I mean, I was in Oman, literally with the Omani Foreign Ministry folks, a couple of weeks before that fifth round of talks, I think it was, that were to happen. And, you know, we know that regional actors don't want to end up having to pay the price of another regional war. So there are a lot of states in the region, particularly Gulf states that have capacity, that do want to play the role of reducing tensions. This is actually kind of different from in the past, because in the past they might have thought, you know, let the Americans, the Israelis, and the Iranians go at it. Who cares? But they've realized actually they should care because they're frontline states. And, you know, I'm just perhaps I should make a reference to Iran's missile attack to the airbase, the U.S. airbase in Doha. But, you know, if you look at the map, proximity matters, and these countries do care now in terms of the issue of de-escalation. Turning to Iran internally, so Mona, you talked about 86-year-old Khamenei. We're talking about it before we came on stage. I just pointed out that his father died when he was 96. So maybe there's the issue of genes here we have to take into account. I don't know. I certainly don't think it's a good policy to sort of hope that longevity is going to, you know, fix the problem in this case. He has been around for a long time. He has failed, I think, in everything he's touched. Now, I'm an analyst. I'm not in the policy circles. I'm more of a historian than anything else. But as a historian, I look at it and I struggle to point to something and say, here's a win. This is what he did. This is what the people of Iran today point to. So we're proud of that. The long list of grievances, whether it's the issue of corruption, where he single-handedly has pretty much stopped corruption being fought in a serious way, because oftentimes those people engaged in the worst types of corruption in Iran happen to be in the political circles of the supreme leader, and you can't touch him. So you got the issue of corruption, you got the issue of sanctions. I mean, again, the daily amount of references Iranian analysts make to the cost of Iran's nuclear program is mind-boggling. The latest I heard, and probably true, although there are no real data on this, but over $1 trillion easy has been spent directly or indirectly in having this nuclear program. Over $1 trillion in the last 22 years. You know, Iran could probably be making about 150 is an exaggeration, about $120 billion a year, just selling crude oil, nothing else, just crude oil. And it's getting about 43 now. I mean, you could just add the numbers up. This is all down to a foreign policy by a man who, by the way, on a personal level, I think he wouldn't disagree with me if he was here, on the stubborn side. Look, you could have a nuclear program and have it in a different way. The slogans, sir, about, you know, regional states like Israel having to disappear, they don't help the case here. You're trying to convince the world that your nuclear program is peaceful. So again, I'm getting to a point where I might start ranting, and that's dangerous. So let me just go back to your question and gather my thoughts. Khamenei has a lot of issues, and succession is coming in. He's 86. There's already a nasty fight inside the Iranian regime. And it's not the so-called reformists who are fighting the hardliners. In this case, what we're witnessing increasingly are hardliners fighting hardliners. What does that tell you? It tells you this is not about Islamist ideology. This is about power. Because if you have power, you have access to the money. Right? That's all it is. So, and again, I don't want to bore you, but those of you who watch Iran closely, you know the types of characters I'm talking about, the Saeed Jalilis of this world, who are getting ready to be in place to succeed, because there you will control a country of 90 million, the size of Alaska, 3 times the size of France, pretty important country, and a huge, so there are opportunities if you have political power. Look, Iranians, I have to tell you, Mona, this is the thing that, you know, I left Iran 40 years ago, but I've been watching Iran daily for 25 years. It breaks your heart to see the younger generation of Iran literally having no hope, that there's no hope, that there's nothing that is hopeful. The best thing you can hope for is get out, emigrate. This isn't what Iran is supposed to be. It's got the potential to be a top 20 economy if it plays its cards right. And I always remind people, you know, look at South Korea in 1979, where they were economically, and look at them today. What is it, 8th largest economy? Iran used to have a bigger economy than South Korea, and they don't have oil, and they don't have gas. Iran has 15% of the world's oil and gas combined in one country. So, you know, I can point to the foreign policy being wrong. Some people say it's ideological. Others, there's a debate in this town between those people who look at Iran more of an ideological entity. I'm kind of closer to that, and those people say Iran is misunderstood, is acting out as because it's a non-Arab country in an Arab-dominated region. The Americans are after it, therefore it acts in the way it does. It's out of insecurity. But if it's true, then I think there are better ways of dealing with your insecurities. And that will be the challenge of whoever takes over from Khamenei. I have no idea who's going to take over from Khamenei. Let me just point out, the whole idea of supreme leadership is pretty much made up. In 1979, there's nothing in Islam that talks about supreme leadership or Shia Islam. This is all made up. In 1979, there's only been one other supreme leader, the current one, Ali Khamenei. His name was, as you remember, Khomeini. And there could be a situation where there is no third supreme leader. This ends with him. Nobody's going to miss it. This has never happened before in history. It didn't turn out so effective.
You heard it here first, folks. No one's going to miss the supreme leader.
Nobody. All right, there goes my wine later today. Thank you, I'll stop.
No, I didn't mean to stop you. I just couldn't resist that. No, and again, I'm sure when we bring the audience in, there's plenty of things to probe further on. But Alina, I want to bring you into the conversation. And I want to start with the Gulf, because I think in this formulation of an emerging order in the Middle East, I think the Gulf is the new center of gravity in this new Middle East. And I would argue Saudi Arabia is the center of gravity. As a result of what we might have learned from this visit, and the Gulf's role in the region and how you see it. So I'm giving my view, but I think we want to hear your view on that.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure for me to join this panel with all of my colleagues we've worked with for a long time, and thanks, Mona. I don't disagree with you at all, or I agree with you with how you frame the situation with the Gulf today. And I just want to put a little bit more sort of ornaments on that Christmas tree, so to speak, not to mix our religions in the region, but and explain sort of where we are and sort of a little bit going forward. So it's true, the Gulf states, as a result of the October 7th and the ensuing regional conflict, because you can't discount what happened after that, has really put the Gulf states as the fulcrum of, you say, as this new regional order. I think the visit, I would, the visit of Crown Prince, we call him MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, in many ways is a long time coming. But what I would argue is that really it is the final step in Washington efforts over the last 5 years, and I include the Biden administration in this, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, in resetting U.S. ties to the Gulf. We've been through, I would say, some pretty tough times over the last 5 years with our Gulf partners. The relations, we have probably disagreed more, some of it, behind closed doors, than agreed on many things that have gone on. For example, the rift with Qatar. There's the Khashoggi assassination. There's the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. We all forget about that, but that was not a smooth sailing discussion between us and our Gulf partners. Some of them helped us, the Qataris, the Kuwaitis, the Emiratis, but it took a lot of behind the scenes engagement. Also, frankly, they were quite upset about the lackluster responses to Iranian and Yemeni belligerent attacks at the end of the day under the Biden administration. There's a lot to be said. They don't agree necessarily with the pacing or how they do the normalization ties with Israel. That's, again, a future conversation. But frankly, over the last 5 years, it hasn't been all that smooth. And then finally, we've also been at odds with them on hedging the dangerous partnerships with Russia and China. And over the last 5 years, we've disagreed with them. Whether it's the Biden administration or the Trump administration, we have disagreed with how they do it. I think they're coming back around on that. So let me talk a little bit about where we're going and where this visit, I think, signals. There are two key areas: security and the economic investment ties. How we're going to view the Gulf. I think as I think Dan said, the Israeli attack on Qatar on the 9th, I think has been really very much a catalyst for the president to reaffirm the importance of the Gulf to U.S. and regional security. They've recognized, I think, that the deterrence of the Gulf can no longer rest solely on our military presence, on arms sales, and economic deals. It's broader than that. It requires a much more integrated and politically viable framework, which is at the end of the day what the Biden administration began talking about and trying to set, but now the Trump administration, in many unconventional ways, is pursuing that. And this visit here has a lot to do with continuing to travel down that journey. The executive order, if you look at the executive order pledging to defend Qatar, I think also has sent an explicit message that America's red lines exist beyond Israel and can include Israel. Tricky business. We'll see where that goes. But at the end of the day, the attack on Hamas in Qatar, there was a lot of back discussions about how that would affect the relationship in the long run. It's recovered for all sorts of reasons we can go into, but it required also that the Trump administration communicate that the parameters of U.S. defense commitments in the region are widened and maybe permanently, which is, again, the discussion of what does that defense pact, not just with the Qataris and understandings with the Emiratis, but now with the Saudis, are going to be included. The challenge in that, of course, is going to be whether or not the Trump administration can give enough assurances about building this foundation for a new security architecture in the region. Is it durable? Is it going to be sustainable? What is it going to mean? And how many of our Gulf partners are going to be in it? And that's where the construction, the reconstruction of that security, of that new security framework, and the political context in which it's going to be based on is going to take place. I think the Saudis, the Qataris, and the Emiratis, who are going to be really the core elements of it, are going to want definitely assurances that any legal ambiguity that's in there is going to actually take into account its durability. They're not going to put up with that. The question of whether or not this will be in exchange for normalization with Israel, I think in large measure, as you heard from Dan, honestly will be, where do we go on Gaza? Because that is, at the end of the day, with respect to security and political dynamics in the region, the prize is the normalization of Israel. So I think, again, I see this visit with all of the fanfare of deals and security discussions, et cetera, to fundamentally be that reset. All of our 6 GCC partners are now back in, for the most part, good standing with us, and have a way to go forward under the Trump administration. Let me also talk a little bit about the context of Saudi Arabia in economic deals. At the end of the day, they're big, they have a large population, and they are looking for opening up the country for economic deals, for commercial deals with the United States. And there's no reason, and there's a lot to be done there. Emirates, yes, as a center for innovation, technology, but the Saudi Arabia is really the prize. And I think that was definitely parameters of that and the direction of that was again solidified and confirmed. It's AI technology, it's investment in Saudi Arabia's infrastructure, opportunities for Saudis to actually get jobs, because one of the things we really haven't talked about is how that youth bulge in the region, they want jobs. They're not interested in the conflicts anymore. They really need jobs. They want a future, and they don't want to see more conflict, because they want investment. They want to be back in, they want to get into the global economy, which of course we worry about that term, but it is a global economy. And technology is important, and a lot of work has been done, even in the last 5 years, about setting that economic path together as partners. But I think now that you have the political unit of the Gulf sort of back on track, it's peace in the valley, so to speak. It's, I think it can go forward. So, I mean, I can go through a long list, as many of our colleagues have, about the challenges that we face, the differences of opinion, the internal rivalries and competition between the three key, very important Gulf partners, the UAE, the Saudis, and the Emiratis. They don't all get along, but right now they want to see that their region, first of all, stays at the top of the relationship, and they see that it's very important going into both, if they ever normalize relations with Israel, and also what's going to happen is you very articulately laid out in Iran, that the United States is a rock-solid security partner. That doesn't mean necessarily to them or to the Trump administration or to the United States that it means boots on the ground. We put substantial presence after Desert Storm, for those of you who remember that. We built it out. We really built it out. But one of the things that we didn't do enough of is to make sure that the Gulf states and others actually took ownership of their own security situation. And I think that's where we're going. I'll talk a little bit more about that with respect to Iraq. That's a whole different question. But I do think that with the Trump administration's basically principle of no more forever wars, and that countries, we talked about it in NATO, others and regions have to take responsibility of their own security. The nature of the defense pact, that if we conclude with our Gulf states, will include very much their responsibility. We have no problem sharing some technologies with them. We'll have no problem giving defense sales, but it's not going to be just us being the final guarantor, I think, of that region.
So you mentioned Iraq, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about Iraq, given that you most recently served there. Iraq just had parliamentary elections last week. What do those elections tell us about the state of play domestically within Iraq, who's up and who's down? And in particular, what is the state of Iranian influence in Iraq? What can we read from the election results, to the extent that we know them, with respect to the dynamics both within Iraq and also its ties back to Iran? And then lastly, as part of that question, also help us understand better what are the domestic challenges that Iraq currently faces.
Well, let me first start by saying, Iraq is still seen by so many in the United States as what it looked like back in 2003, 2008, 2017, 2019, with ISIS, the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, then the emergence of ISIS with our U.S. troops there, and casualties and that happened, and attacks on us. But Iraq is different. It's changing, and this election, in many ways, could reaffirm to the world and the region and to the United States that it is going to continue on a different path. We talk about balancing the Middle East, balancing the world. Well, this is, for Iraqis, this election is a balance. It's a balance within their internal politics, and most importantly, and I'll skip to a lot of the back and forth on the elections internally, but it's a balance between who has the greatest influence in Iraq, the United States or Iran. And I want to say, and for us, the United States, that is an important. We cannot afford to lose Iraq. If you look at where Iraq was during the last 2 years, it is the only state that had Iranian-backed militias that were attacking, that joined the axis, is part of the axis of resistance, that attacked Israel, that Israel didn't attack. And there is a recognition between, I think, the United States, Iran, and Israel, that Iraq cannot join and tilt too far to the Iranians. Now, the Iranians have influence, you asked. They have a 1,200-mile border that's pretty porous. They have a lot of influence over water that flows in there. They use it all. They are continuing to support the militias, and many of the militias actually gained seats, got seats in the parliament, not surprisingly. But the Iraqis themselves, and this is where I think we'll see what happens in the government formation, I'll get there in a minute, whether or not the Iranians have the kind of influence to drag the Iraqis back into their very tight sphere. I would argue that it's not in Tehran's interest, that they get more out of an Iraq that is balanced with good relations with the United States. But the cost of that, from the United States point of view, and we've seen that already with the Trump administration's policy of doubling down hard on the current government, Sudanese government, to disarm the Iranian militias and then to dismantle the economic networks that have been put in place to keep them. So, bottom line on the elections, we're in the Iraqi current Sudani government is in a caretaker status. That will make it very messy. Sudani actually got most of the seats, the largest number of seats in the parliament, 46 out of 329. That puts him in the front-runner status, but not enough to really get him what he really wants, which is the second term. And the way Iraqi politics, and we won't go into a lot of this, but generally speaking, the conventional way of going forward is this: the presidency goes to the Sunni leadership, to the Kurds. The speaker goes to the Sunni bloc, and they're the weakest. And now the Shia, which are quite united in their number of seats in the parliament, take the prime ministership. There's going to be a lot of backroom haggling. There's going to be a lot of buying favors. The leaders in the Shia bloc have made it clear that they don't want Sudani to have a second term, but Sudani got a lot of the votes, and he's pretty popular in Iraq for having balanced the relationship, kept Iraq out of the conflict, and also brought a lot of investment and repaired Iraq's image in the region for being a constructive player in some of the difficult aspects of that conflict. They are also very engaged in trying to make the Syrian situation, calm it a little, which the Iraqis have generally never been a constructive voice in regional politics. So Iraq is changing. It's not only changing in terms of its perspective and its direction, it's also changing internally. Iraqis are looking for American investment. That's going to be tough because there's still a lot of corruption and there's security issues, but they're trying. And the young people, again, 40% of Iraq their population is under 15, and they need a future. And they also don't want Iranian meddling in their politics and in their economics. So it's a great play. Iraq is not, Baghdad in particular, and other big cities are not. Don't look like the place where there were T-walls. They're coming down. Cinnabon is there, KFC is there, they opened the last 3 or so, and you go into those places, you laugh at that. You laugh at that. If we can keep Cinnabon and KFC open and Pizza Hut open and a number of other American franchises, that's good.
That's good. American soft power is alive and well. Yep.
American soft power is alive and well. And when I was there as the ambassador, young Iraqis couldn't wait to come to see the U.S. ambassador, to engage in our programs, and to count on the United States as bringing a strong future for them. I'll stop at that and get to the Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alina. A lot to think about. So I want to make sure you all have a chance to engage. So please, yes, raise your question. I see gentlemen here. I don't know if we have mics.
Mic back here.
Okay.
And just for your awareness, we've got time for about 2 questions. And if anybody else wants to engage the speakers afterwards, you can go outside.
When Ambassador Shapiro mentions the pathways towards a Palestinian state, to me that sounds like Donald Trump's concepts of a health care plan. How do you have a Palestinian state with 500,000 militant settlers in the West Bank, plus the settlements in East Jerusalem that the Palestinians say they want to have as their capital, and also they want to control their own borders, which Netanyahu said never happened. So really, how is this possible to work? 500,000 militants, move them out?
I got into this line of work 32 years ago precisely to try to help achieve a two-state solution between Israelis and Palestinians. You'll see how well I'm doing this far into the career. It's a very distant prospect, and you're right that there's no specifics attached to this plan. Just to slightly amend your description, I wouldn't say 500,000 settlers are militants. There are militants among them. We see them conducting these violent attacks against Palestinians. The vast majority of them are not in that category, but they are living in territory that the Palestinians, of course, want to be as part of their state. This is, as I kind of indicated earlier, if we will ever get to a Palestinian state, and it is on the table, put there by the president and, of course, endorsed by, that's how he got all these Arab states, and not just the Arab states, Turkey, Indonesia, Pakistan, other leading Muslim states, to endorse his 20-point plan by including it. It's going to take time. First, Gaza is going to have to get settled. Hamas is going to have to be removed from power. And a different and alternative and moderate Palestinian leadership is going to have to take hold there. That is part of how you begin to get Israelis, who, as I said, are really not open to this right now, across the spectrum, not including people who used to be very pro-two states. They say it's just too dangerous after October 7th. You have to engage them by showing that what's happening in Gaza is different and Hamas is removed. And then the Palestinian Authority itself in the West Bank has to be reformed. And that's also a consensus view. Arabs support that. It's not going to happen under this current Palestinian Authority president, Mahmoud Abbas, who's also in his late 80s and really not the person who will bring about that reform. If you can get those two very difficult processes underway, then you have a conversation with the Israeli public that says, what does it look like to have a Palestinian state? It might be different borders than we used to imagine. It might need to carve out some of those settlements. That was always on the table, that Israel would keep that maybe with some land swaps. It's going to look different. It's going to take longer than what we imagined when I got into this line of work during the Oslo period and in a couple of decades after that. Very, very difficult, very challenging. No one should be Pollyannish about the ability to achieve that. But that's, I think, the best way to describe it, as a kind of North Star with trying to put these various building blocks in place that could slowly but surely move in that direction.
Other questions?
I've got a question over here, and I think this is going to be our last one.
Hello, I'm Jenny from Dallas. Howdy, y'all. Just a quick question. What can you say about how the U.S. foreign policy should think about Middle East influence in other regions, such as the Emiratis in Sudan?
Lily, why don't you start with that? And I don't know if colleagues...
I'm not... Can
Emiratis in Sudan.
Oh, yes. Well, that's one of those issues where, we have a difference of opinion here. But but again, in the U.S. Emirati relationship and ties and issues that we want to focus on, it's largely in the Middle East. And we had disagreements with the Emiratis and others in Libya. We work those, but to be frank here, they're not at this point going to upset the more important aspects of that relationship, which has to do with investments, both that the Emiratis have promised to do here, but also that we're going to work with them on the security and the economic investments. I mean, that is the reality. It's a topic of conversation, just as it would. There were some in difficult ones with the Saudis, but it's not going to be a game changer. That's my opinion.
So I'm sorry we're not able to accommodate more questions. This happened last year too, but anyway, we'll raise that later. I'm sure our colleagues will be happy to speak with you after the session and entertain any additional questions or comments you have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our outstanding panelists. Ambassador Romanowski, Ambassador Shapiro, and Alex Watanka. I think this was a very thoughtful and deeply informative conversation. And we thank you, Mona, for guiding the discussion with such clarity and depth. And we're grateful to you, the audience, for joining us for this session, the 2025 Fulcrum Middle East. Now, before moving on to our next program, we invite you to step out for a 15-minute break, at which point, the panelists will be available in the hallway, as well as signing of the book. One more thing. So during the following 1 hour, we will have 3 breakout sessions: the rebalancing of U.S. assistance located at the drawing room, tools to keep the world connected, the role of soft power, at Salons 2 and 3, and Continental Drift, the transatlantic relationship, at Salons 4 and 5. This concludes our session, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.